How's everybody doing? We are really glad that you're here. So, I was in California a couple of months ago, and we went into this Mexican restaurant for lunch in Newport Beach. Now, if you've been around Calvary for any length of time, you know that I'm not a huge fan of Mexican food. I've said that. But when I was in California, I ate Mexican food every day, sometimes twice a day. It turns out I just don't like Florida Mexican food, but if I'm in Texas or I'm in California, I mean, that's all I eat. Anyway, so we walk into the restaurant, and I'm wearing a t-shirt of this band that I like, and I've had this shirt for, 4 or 5 years. And the girl at the hostess station says, "Hey, I really like your shirt." And I said, "Thank you. You're the first person ever to mention it when I'm wearing it." So anyway, and she says, "Well, Fall Out Boy's my favorite band, and I saw them 15 times last year." And I'm like, "Okay." And I'm thinking, now I know what your hobby is. And I said, "Well, we actually saw them 3 times, but we all went." And she's like, "You guys all went? You're all fans?" I'm like, "Yeah, we all like the band." She's like, that makes me so happy. And anyway, so she sat us at the table, and that was the end. But because I'm telling you this story, you know that's not the end, because if that actually was the end, like, what is this guy even talking about, right? So anyway, we get done with our meal, and the server that we had says, "Hey, our manager has something for you." And I said, "Okay." And the server then brings out this huge dessert. I mean, it's humongous. It serves 12 people. There's 5 of us in our family. I mean, we took it out because we're not quitters. And but anyway, so then he comes back a little bit later. I'm like, "Wow, tell your manager I said thank you so much." And he's like, "Hey, are you friends with our manager? Because I have the bill for you, but she took more than half the bill off." And I'm like, "I don't even know who your manager is." And so anyway, it turned out to be the girl at the hostess station. And I'm like, "You mean Amber? We're good friends with Amber." I mean, we've known her for like 45 minutes now. And so anyway, we go say thank you and whatever. And so then we walk out to the car, and I tell the kids, I'm like, "See this? This is the shirt that pays. FYI. So anyway, so we leave from there, and we're in Newport Beach. So we go one town over to Costa Mesa because I want to take my kids to Calvary Chapel of Costa Mesa, which they hadn't been to, which is where the Calvary Chapel movement started. And so anyway, so we get there, and they have a school as well. And so we're walking around the campus a little bit. I'm talking a little bit about the history of the church, and I'm like, "Well, if you saw the Jesus Revolution movie, this and that." So I'm telling them that story. This is where the tent was when they were building it. And anyway, so the bookstore was open, and that, by the way, that was part of our plan and why we wanted to. One of the reasons we wanted to go to California is that we wanted to show our kids kind of our spiritual background, where we were from, kind of what are the churches that God really used in our lives, and when we were really starting to kind of grow up spiritually and growing in the Lord. And so anyway, so they have a bookstore, so we go into the bookstore. And by the way, I was totally inspired by their bookstore. That's really going to influence what we do over here in our cafe. More on that later. And we go to the cafe. I'm sorry. See, I'm already thinking about it. So we go to the bookstore, and everybody's my wife is picking out some gifts for some friends, and everybody's got a couple things. And as we're paying, the girl behind the counter, she has this little sheet of paper that's got like this little hash marks on it, and she's like, and it's like, how did people hear about the bookstore? She says, "Hey, can I ask, how did you hear about the bookstore?" And I said, "Well, actually, I'm a Calvary Chapel pastor." And she's like, "Oh, for real?" And I said, "Yeah." I said, "I pastor a church in Florida." And she said, "Oh, that means you're entitled to a big discount on your bill." And I'm like, "Really?" Because that's what I'm talking about. And so anyway, and then Livy, my youngest daughter, she's like, "Oh, there's a discount. Okay, so let me go back and get the other stuff I wanted, because I was really holding back this whole time." So she goes back and gets this other stuff. And by the way, she did not really wait for authorization. She was just like, "This is what I'm doing." And I'm like, "I guess that's okay." And so anyway, so it was like a whole day. I'm like, basically, this is kind of the life that I'm trying to figure out. It's like, how do I just, like, everywhere I go, huge discounts happen. This is kind of what so anyway, that happens. So the next day, we go to Disneyland. And now, let me just tell you a little something about Disneyland, which I love. You think the ticketing situation is tough at Disney World, And the ticketing situation at Disneyland is totally out of hand. And it's way more expensive. And so I'm talking, so they have these, when you walk up, they have these little kind of huts or whatever you would call them. This little, and you walk up, there's a window, and you're talking to the person. Ethel is who I was talking to. And I'm going to be honest with you. I don't want to talk smack or anything, but Ethel was not very helpful. And she tells me the price of all 5 of us going to Disneyland and California Adventure for 2 days. And she told me the number, and I'm like, don't even mess around. And what's the real number? And she's like, no, that's the number. And I'm like, Ethel, maybe there's a discount or 3 available to me. And she's like, okay, let me ask, are you current military? And I'm like, no, but I really like the band Fall Out Boy. And she's like, okay, that's not applicable. That's not applicable. And she's like, are you former military? And I'm like, no, but I'm a Calvary Chapel pastor, which means I'm in the Lord's army. So put me down let's add that discount immediately. She's like, not applicable. It's not applicable. And anyway, she did not apply any discount, and she just kept saying not applicable. And I was just like, you know what, Ethel, we were going to hang out. And I was going to invite you to Cars Land. We were going to go on Radiator Springs Racers, but now that's impossible. And you're going to have to stay here working, and I'm going to go. And anyway, and that was it. That was the end of the story with Ethel. It could have ended better, but it didn't, because everything was non-applicable. And but I think that's what how people view not just the commandment that we're going to look at today, but even the commandment as we get further into the book of Exodus. They're just like, yeah, they're not applicable for me. That has nothing to do with me. And this is where I want to spend some time talking about this, especially with this command. So if you can believe it or not, this is message number 20 in our series through the book of Exodus, which you think we'd kind of be moving, but we're only going to cover 4 words, so I really got to kind of pick up the pace a little bit. But we're in the middle of talking about the 10 Commandments, and if you remember, the ancient rabbis would call they would call the 10 Commandments the 10 words, and that if we will live by these 10 words, that will allow us to live the best life possible. And this next command, as I mentioned, is 4 words, but it's really going to make for not only a better society, better homes, and better families if we obey it. So, Exodus chapter 20, we're going to read verse 13, and here's what we have. You shall not murder. Okay, and with that, we're done. And so, we're like, really? You're letting us out early? No, I'm not. But here's the problem, is that we read this, and we're like Ethel, not applicable. It's all good. Let's move on. And because we say, well, I have no plans currently to murder anyone. And so, but before we get into this, now let me just explain how I've kind of laid out this message. I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about what this does not refer to. Then I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about what it does refer to. And then what's cool is that Jesus talks about this command. So then we're going to spend our time at the end talking about what Jesus had to say about how this passage applies to us. So let's talk about 3 things so we understand as we get going. What does this command not mean? What does it not mean? Number 1, it does not refer to killing animals for food. In Genesis chapter 9, God he says, everything that lives and moves shall be food for you, just as I gave you green plants. Now I give you everything. So this is referring to being able to eat meat. If you remember, this magazine was really popular like 20 years ago. It was called The Vegetarian Times. I don't know if you ever heard of it. But when they celebrated their 20th anniversary as a magazine, the founder of the Vegetarian Times, to celebrate, he went to Ruth Chris Steakhouse and ordered a 20-ounce steak. And when reporters asked him, you run a vegetarian magazine, why did you go to a steakhouse? He said, 20 years of tofu is enough for anyone. And I got to be honest, I'm with that. And so God allows us to eat animals for food. All the carnivores said amen. And but I know that and by the way, if you say, yeah, that's not really me, I don't want to do that, I prefer being vegetarian, you have that freedom to not eat meat. And some people are like, I don't want to do that because I love animals. I love animals too. I think they're delicious. And so anyway. So it doesn't refer to killing animals for food. The second thing is that this does not refer to capital punishment. Now, this is an area of much debate. But I will say this, that capital punishment is the basis of human government. Once again, back in Genesis 9, from each man, too, I will demand an accounting for the life of his fellow man. Whoever sheds the blood of man, by man his blood will be shed, for in the image of God has God made man. When you remove the death penalty from society, the system starts to break down. If you go in the past, like 30 years ago, first-degree murder got the death penalty. Rape got 15 years in prison. Shoplifting got 5 years in prison. Now let's fast forward to today and how the system has been completely dumbed down. Shoplifting doesn't even get prosecuted in many counties anymore. A convicted rapist serves on average of a little over 3 years in prison for the crime that he's committed. And someone convicted of murder will serve max 25, sometimes as little as 10 years. And today, the average life sentence is 8 years. So someone gets sentenced to life in prison, the average that they serve is actually 8 years. That's a real problem. Now, the critique that people have of the death penalty is that, well, the death penalty isn't a deterrent for crime. And I disagree with that because it's definitely a deterrent to the person who gets executed. That person is definitely not committing any more crimes. And that works for me. And so does it, you know, is it a deterrent for anybody else? I don't know, but we're just going to work this out one at a time until there's no more people that want to commit these crimes. And that's why, once again, when people hold up the thou shalt not kill signs at executions, they simply don't understand the verse. It's literally you shall not murder, and what God is forbidding is the premeditated murder of other people. And you say, but what about something like war? Well, I'm glad you asked, because this is the third one, and that is it does not refer to war. And in Ecclesiastes chapter 3, Solomon writes, there is a time for everything and a season for every activity under heaven. A time to love and a time to hate, a time for war and a time for peace. Just as a person has a right to defend themselves, and we're going to talk about self-defense laws when we get to Exodus 22, which at the rate we're going will be in 4 years. But no, hopefully we can move it to a few weeks and kind of get things moving here. But we're going to talk about self-defense laws when we get to chapter 22. But in the same way that a person can defend themselves, a nation also has a right to defend themselves from those who would attack it. Now, what it does not give a nation the right to do is to be the aggressor in this. So we can't decide as America that we're going to invade Canada. Which, first of all, you can't even do that. They have like 6 Mounties guarding the border. That's it. But we're going and we're taking all the maple syrup. We're not taking the bacon because ours is way better than theirs. But we can say, no, we can't do that. We can't be the aggressor. But we do have the right to defend ourselves. And once again, even the most basic reading of the Old Testament will reveal that truth. So, what is God referring to? That's what he's not referring to. What is he referring to? In Exodus, primarily what he's talking about is the disregard of human life. That's what we're talking about. So let me tell you the 3 things in particular that God is saying no to according to this verse. Number 1, God is saying no to premeditated murder. This is different than defending yourself if someone breaks into your house. This is what the Bible calls lying in wait, where you are working out the details of how you're going to kill someone. The Bible prohibits first-degree murder. The second thing is God is saying no to suicide. If you aren't aware, suicide is the second leading cause of death amongst those who are aged 15 to 24 years old. This is a serious issue that we have in this country. The reality is, just as we didn't get to decide when our life began, we don't get to decide when our life ends. That is God who decides that. In the book of Romans, the Apostle Paul says this, "For we don't live for ourselves or die for ourselves. If we live, it's to honor the Lord. If we die, it's to honor the Lord. So whether we live or die, we belong to the Lord." Now, let me tell you something, that there are moments that people go through in their lives where they are depressed, and sometimes people even feel a sense of despair. And they say, is life worth living? I'm telling you, if you have considered or are considering taking your life, I'm telling you this, there is hope. You matter to God. You were made with a purpose. He cares for you, and you need to talk to somebody. Talk to someone who loves God. Talk to someone who loves you to help you get through this season. Why? And here's the thing. We don't make permanent decisions based on temporary feelings. Let me say it again. We don't make permanent decisions based on temporary feelings. Why? Because the season that you're going through is going to pass, and there's better days that are coming. I have 3 friends from high school who took their own lives, and one of them I spoke to days before it happened. And I had just become a Christian. I want to say I had maybe been a Christian a month. His name was, the one guy I'm talking to, his name was Dave. And we were briefly in a band together. And he I saw him in the mall. I was in Coral Square Mall in Coral Springs. I could tell you the spot where I was when we saw each other, and we were just catching up, talking together. And once again, I had just become a Christian. I didn't have the vocabulary to be able to explain what God was doing in me yet. And we just talked, hey, things are good. Are you good? Okay. And man, I didn't share the gospel with him. I didn't share what God was doing in my life. And that is a regret that I've carried. And everyone I know that knows these guys carries this regret. Why? Because suicide doesn't make things better. It makes things infinitely worse, and it's why God says not to do it. Now, here's the third one, is that God is saying no to abortion. Now, this is a touchy subject, and this is one that people have made political. And but I'm going to be honest with you. I don't see this as a political issue so much as I see it as a human issue. The Bible teaches that God forms us in the womb. Science confirms that. Now, there may be unplanned pregnancies, but there are no accidental births. God wanted you to be alive. Now, it may have happened because two people didn't follow God's plan, but God had a plan for that child, and to take its life because it doesn't fit into our plans, I'm sorry, is a violation of the sixth commandment of murdering. Now, and if you have the argument or someone wants to give us the argument, it's not a child, it's a clump of cells. I'm sorry, let me tell you this, so are you. So am I. All of us are a clump of cells. But just because we are, that doesn't negate our value. If we're being honest, the argument for abortion is primarily an argument about convenience. All of the extreme things that people say make up less than 1% of the cases for it. Now, why is this important? King David in Psalm 139 said this, "You made all the delicate inner parts of my body and knit me together in my mother's womb. Thank you for making me so wonderfully complex. Your workmanship is marvelous. How well I know it. You watched me as I was being formed in utter seclusion, as I was woven together in the dark of the womb. You saw me before I was born. Every day of my life was recorded in your book. Every moment was laid out before a single day had passed." Now, maybe you haven't had the opportunity to do this. I have had this opportunity many times, and that is to have conversations with women who have had abortions and experience guilt and deep regret over what happened, and it is heartbreaking. Every time they see a child that would have been their child's age, it just breaks them. And I'm telling you this, as I said previously, I mean, if you're thinking about doing this, there are beautiful alternatives. There are couples that would do anything to have a child and would love this child. So once again, 4Kids is out here today, and there's opportunities to talk about that. But here's the other reason why this matters, is that you don't know who God is creating in the womb. In Jeremiah chapter 1, God speaks to the prophet and says, "The word of the Lord came to me saying, before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. Before you were born, I set you apart. I appointed you as a prophet to the nations." I have a friend named George whose mom got pregnant and had an abortion. The problem was that the doctor who performed the abortion didn't realize that she was pregnant with twins. And a couple of months later, he was born. And today he's a pastor and is dedicated his life to leading other people to faith in Christ and talking about how life matters. Now, God has a plan for that child, and we need to obey this command. Now, let me speak for a moment, because I know, listen, over the course of 3 services, there's a lot of people who attend here and listen to these messages that maybe you've had an abortion in the past, and you feel incredibly guilty. Can I just say this, that none of this was shared to condemn you? Instead, we need to know the truth, but I want to share another truth that's important, that Jesus forgives us of all of our sins, even the ones that we have a hard time forgiving ourselves of. And what you did as a non-Christian in the past, let me tell you something, when you came to know Jesus, he has not only forgiven you, but he's turning you into a new creation. In 2 Corinthians chapter 5, Paul says, if anyone is in Christ, he is a new creation. The old is gone, the new has come. So if you're a Christian now, God is transforming you into a new person. There is a new person that is emerging. All of us have sinned. All of us have fallen short of God's standards. All of us need grace. All of us need forgiveness. So here's my counsel to you. Receive it and let God heal you. I know it's heavy, and I know that this topic is heavy. So I'm going to tell you a story. Whenever things get heavy, we're talking through something heavy. I want to tell you a story of what I say whenever things get real heavy at my house. One day, our washing machine broke at our house. This is years ago. Mia's about 3 years old. Xander was a baby. And I had to have a guy come over and fix it. So I get home from the office before the repairman shows up to fix the washing machine. Now, when Mia was little, she would give me a report of everything that happened that day. So it was like a news report. When she started writing, she would make a newspaper every day that she would give me. There was a couple of articles. There was an editorial piece, usually about candy being allowed for children. And but anyway, so there was that was every day. But before she could write, she would tell me, like, she would wait for me at the door. Papi, here's the news of the day. This is what happened. We did this. We had this for lunch. And anyway, so that was kind of the whole thing. So I get home, and she's waiting for me at the door. She says, Papi, this is what happened today. And she's like, but something else happened. Let me take you. So she takes my hand. She walks me over to the laundry room. And she says, Papi, the machine doesn't work. And now my underwear is broken. And so anyway, and I was like, well, don't worry. There's a repairman coming. Anyway, what does that have to do with anything? Nothing. I just thought I'd lighten the mood a little bit because it's been so heavy for a little while. So now, how do we apply this passage? You're like, but see, it's not applicable. I'm not going to murder anyone. I'm not going to do any of those things. The thing is that Jesus had something to say about this passage and how it applies to us. In Matthew chapter 5, here's what Jesus says. You have heard it said to those of old, you shall not murder. And whoever murders will be in danger of the judgment. But I say to you, whoever is angry with his brother without a cause shall be in danger of the judgment. And whoever says to his brother, Raka, shall be in danger of the council, that is the Jewish council, the Sanhedrin. And whoever says, you fool, shall be in danger of hellfire. Therefore, if you bring your gift to the altar, and there remember that your brother has something against you, leave your gift there before the altar and go your way. First be reconciled to your brother, and then come and offer your gift. Agree with your adversary quickly, while you are on the way to him, lest your adversary deliver you over to the judge hand you over to the officer, and you be thrown into prison. Assuredly, I say to you, you will by no means get out of there until you have paid the last penny. And if you pause there and give me your attention. Okay, 3 things we're going to talk about concerning this passage that Jesus references the 6th commandment. The first is this, if you're a note taker, and that is that my faith should be revealed in my relationships. Now, let me explain the way most religious systems work. The most religious systems work that as long as you're okay with God and don't offend God, things are good. The problem with that, and a lot of people think that that's how Christianity works, and they think that because they've had this, you've experienced this, I've experienced this, that over the years you've met people that said they were Christians, said they were religious, said they had faith, but they were also complete jerks. And you're like, how does that actually work? And the way it works is they were sure that they were okay with God. And so as long as they were okay with God, they could treat people however they wanted. Why? Because they believed the right things, they prayed the right prayers, so it didn't matter how they treated people. Now, this was absolutely true in ancient Judaism, and as Jesus was talking to people in what's called Second Temple Judaism. And it's certainly true in 2024 of people who say that they know God. And I want you to understand what Jesus is saying here. He's saying the law says don't murder, but it's deeper than that. You don't kill someone without having hate and anger in your heart. So how about we deal with that first? Now here's why, and then he mentions the words that we use as his point. Now you might say, I've never killed anyone, but listen, but we assassinate people with our words. And that's the thing that Jesus is calling out. And by the way, I read this, Raka. Like that word doesn't mean anything to us, but it meant something back then. And, so it's like you can't call someone Raka. You're like, I'm walking in victory on that verse because I've never called anyone that. And by the way, if you call me Raka, I'm going to tell you, I'm just going to assume that you're from Boston and I play guitar. And you're like, oh, Pastor Bob plays guitar. He's a big-time Raka. And so that's what I'm going to assume. He's wicked good at guitar. And so, anyway, now, in Jesus' day, Saying raka to somebody was like talking about somebody's mama. I mean, those were fighting words. In fact, raka isn't even a word. It's a sound that then was given a definition. But raka was a sound that you made when you were going to, it was like this kind of visceral, rach, when you were going to spit on someone as a sign of disgust. I don't know if you noticed this, that when I made the sound, I turned this way, like the long way on the stage, because when I taught the Gospel of Matthew like 3 years ago or so, I was standing like this, and I'm like, raka, rach, and I did that, and unfortunately a projectile came out and landed on a very nice gentleman in the front row. And I was mortified. And so while a perfect illustration was also completely gross. So I apologized to the guy, and then the ushers were like, Pastor Bob, we're going to put up one of those glass shields like they have at Subway if you don't get your act together. And so anyway, now we don't have the shield, but I turned this way to, if I'm going to raka, I raka that way. And then I rolla that way. So anyway, so that's how we do that. Now, but raka is a word, it was a sound that came to mean worthless or empty. And it's that you meant that this person's life had zero value. So he says, if you say you fool, the Greek word is moros, where we get the English word moron. And it was an insult to their character. It was more than just saying that they lacked wisdom. It was saying that you don't believe this person has any value as a human being. And Jesus is saying that anger is directly related to how we treat people or whether we think that people matter to God. Because it is not possible to think that we're okay with God and be hostile to others. So he's saying that we've got to treat people in a way that shows that it reveals our faith. And that we treat people in such a way to say, you matter to God, and I want you to feel that way when you're around me. The second thing that he says, if you're a note taker, is that my faith should impact my relationships. Jesus says this. He says in verse 23, therefore, if you bring your gift to the altar, and remember there that your brother has something against you, leave your gift there before the altar and go your way. First be reconciled to your brother, and then come and offer your gift. Now, here's the thing you got to understand. To offer a gift, a sacrifice in that day, was very expensive, and it was also very time-consuming. Every Jewish male had to appear before the Lord, that is, at the tabernacle or at the temple, 3 times a year. And this is, now you have hundreds of thousands of people coming to Jerusalem. The Jewish historian Josephus says that at the time of the Passover, that there was, the city of Jerusalem would swell up to about 1 million people. This is insane. This is like, multiple times what the normal population was. But everyone was coming to Jerusalem to offer a sacrifice to make things right between them and God. So there were, because people were coming from all over the Roman Empire, there were currency exchanges happening. There was the buying and selling of animals. You had to wait for hours in line to offer the sacrifice, which was not just time-consuming, but extremely costly. So Jesus says, if you bring your gift to the altar, not if you bring your gift to the temple. When you bring it to the altar, that means it's finally your turn. You're now finally at the altar where you can offer this sacrifice, where you've waited for multiple hours, you've spent all kinds of money to get there. If you've ever been in line at Disney, you understand what's happening here. Now, every time I think about this story, it reminds me of this moment where Mia is maybe about 3 years old. We go to the Magic Kingdom, and once again, when Mia was 3, the big movie at that time, the movie that played every day at our house, was Tangled. And Mia just loved Rapunzel. I learned just about every song from Tangled on guitar that Mia and I would sing together. And it was, now the kids are musicians, they play for me. But back then, I was the guy, like I was grinding it out, learning all the songs. But anyway, so we get to the Magic Kingdom, and we're going to meet Rapunzel, and the line is over 2 hours. And we do what loving parents do. We get in line, and she's going to meet her hero, right? But it's taking forever. I feel like it's not moving. Mia is sitting in the stroller, and we're trying to keep her entertained because this is like before iPads and electricity and all that. We were still churning our own butter at home. Anyway, then as we're getting close to the front of the line, so we've been in the line for about 2 hours, and there's about maybe 10 people ahead of us. And then I notice that Mia is not moving in the stroller. And I look, and she's totally asleep. Now, this is so uncommon for her because Mia, by the time she was a toddler, she stopped taking naps. And now I am beside myself because we're almost at the front. And my wife says, Bob, just let her sleep, because if you wake her up, she's going to be miserable. Let's just get out of the line. And I'm like, oh no. I have waited in this miserable line for 2 hours, and if I have to, I will take a picture with Rapunzel. But we're not leaving here till someone in our family takes a picture of Rapunzel and her golden hair. And so, anyway, so we're having this conversation as we keep moving up, and so she's still totally asleep. So we're getting to the front line, and every time that I'm moving the stroller, I give it a little jolt to see if I can very naturally wake her up, like, oh, Mama, you're awake, how exciting. And so anyway, and all the little jolting that I did not help. But we get to the front, and now I just start letting people, like, hey, guys, if you want, just go ahead of us. And they're like, really? Wow, that's so nice. I'm like, yeah, I really am quite something. Go ahead. And so anyway, so they're doing that, and but I tell Kara, I'm like, listen, we are going to meet Rapunzel even if it kills us, but we're doing this. So anyway, the good people at Disney, they are trained to notice lunatic behavior. And they can scan an audience and find the crazy person. And they scanned that audience and zeroed in on me. And so they walked up to me and they said, sir, are you okay? I'm like, we passed okay a few exits ago. And so then I explained the situation, and I'm like, listen, here's what I'm going to do. It's fine. I'm just going to stand here and direct traffic for free, by the way. You don't even have to send me a 1099 when this is all done. I'll just be there. I'll direct traffic until my daughter wakes up. And they're like, okay, sir, we can't have you direct traffic because, number one, you don't work here, and you also are acting like someone who's completely unhinged. But here's what we can do. And so they gave me a card with the supervisor's signature that I could come back anytime and hand it to someone and go straight to the front of the line. And I'm like, well, I mean, if that's the case, you guys are the trained ones in directing traffic anyway. What am I even doing here? So anyway, I take that. So, but see, listen, getting out of line in a theme park just sounds totally unreasonable. And the thing that Jesus is asking is so much more, because you've been waiting. You have traveled so far. You have spent so much money. You have now finally gotten to the front of the line. You're at the altar. This is the thing. And he's saying, if your brother has something against you because of something you've done, you get out of the line. And by the way, the high priest ain't signing a card for you. You're going to get back in line. You're going to make it right with your brother, and then you're going to get back. You're going to get back in line and do this all over again. Because he's saying, if you're about to do something sacred and somebody has something against you because of something you've done, you better fix it before the problem gets bigger. But to offer a sacrifice, asking for forgiveness, or sitting in a service and worshiping God, rejoicing in our forgiveness, while outside we are withholding forgiveness, there's a word for that. And it's hypocrisy. It's not living in a congruent way. And listen, this has been the plague of the church. And by the way, it's not because we're the only ones that struggle with it. It's not. There's lots of doctors who smoke. There's lots of marriage counselors who get divorced. And there's lots of vegetarians who occasionally sneak in the pulled pork sandwich now and again, right? It happens, but it's more serious for us because sometimes we think that, well, my faith is my faith, and that's one part of my life, but it doesn't really touch anything else. And no. Our faith, sometimes unbelievers understand this better than we do, that our faith should be the center of our lives and that it should touch everything else in our lives, especially that loving God and loving other people are inextricably connected. And that's the point that Jesus is making. And then the last thing is that my faith should improve my relationships. That's why he says, finally, agree with your adversary quickly. Notice how this has been escalating. He's not just your brother, they got something against you, leave your gift. Now, agree with your adversary quickly while you're on the way, lest your adversary deliver you to the judge. The judge hands you over to the officer, and you be thrown into prison. Assuredly, I say to you, you will not get out of there until you have paid the last penny. Finally, my faith should improve my relationships. Now Jesus changes, and he starts talking about our adversary, and agreeing with them before they take you to court and you get thrown into prison, which is a debtor's prison, where you've got to work off your debt before you can be released. Now, what does that mean? It means a couple of things. It means, the first thing it means is, here's the thing, you might not be right. You think you're right, but it could be that you're not. Also, whenever someone is unwilling to reconcile a relationship, especially when the other party is willing, that's a warning sign. Because if you're like, I've called, I've texted, I've reached out, I've had a friend talk to a friend, I've done everything I can to reconcile, and the other person is unwilling, that should be a red flag. That's like, if this person is going out of their way to reconcile, this other person won't. It starts to show you maybe who's right and who's wrong in this whole situation. But here's the challenge, and this is the point that Jesus is making, is that people who struggle with destructive emotions think that everyone is like them. Even though it's not that what they're doing is normal, but it's that it's normal for them because this is their go-to response for things. Listen, I was shocked to learn that people weren't angry all the time. I was shocked about that. And you just need to learn. When you decide, like, I got to fix this, you've got to be open to people that you trust speaking the truth in your life without getting defensive. Because if you do, people will stop telling you the truth and you'll find yourself alone. But we need to accept the truth because Jesus said truth is what sets people free. Now, I want to show you something that happened to me a while back. I had a dead palm tree in the front of my yard. Here's how it happened. These woodpeckers showed up. And the woodpeckers started working my palm tree and made holes in the palm tree and started living in it. And I was going to get it taken out, and Carrie was like, oh, it's cute to have woodpeckers around. And I'm like, okay, that's fine. And then, which was fine. We'd see these little woodpeckers, this is great. Until the bees showed up. And the bees served the woodpeckers an eviction notice. Like, you don't live here anymore. This is our place now. And then the woodpeckers were gone, and then the bees set up shop. And so then I called the tree trimmer, and I said, look, I need you to deal with, I need to take out this palm tree. So he shows up, and he's like, what's all these holes? I'm like, well, we had woodpeckers, but now there's bees. Don't even worry about it. Let's cut this thing down. And he's like, no, I can't cut this down until you deal with the bees. I'm like, look, what's the worst that could happen? Just cutting this down. And he's like, death? And I'm like, all right. So I call a guy from church who happens to be a bee expert. That's his hive, shall we say. So anyway, so I call him. He comes over. He coordinates with the tree guy. And then he comes over one day, and then he neutralizes the bees. And then he cuts down the tree. Now, let me show you a picture of the tree. This is the tree that we cut down right here. And this thing had all kinds of holes in it. And then it was being occupied by the bees. We cut it down, and then he starts cutting the palm into pieces so that he can take it. Let me show you a picture of the inside. This is one portion of the hive that was in here. The hive went all the way up. And my bee friend told me that there was probably 80,000 bees living 5 feet in front of my house on this palm tree. And he's like, if you would have cut this down without neutralizing the bees, it would have killed someone. I'm like, but what kind of maniac even suggests it? Like, right, how reckless. And I don't even know who suggests that. We fired that guy. Anyway, now, here's my point. If you and I don't deal with whatever destructive emotion that we are struggling with inside, it won't just kill you. And be sure of this, it will kill you. But it will kill everyone and everything around you. And I know that you don't want that. I know you don't. Sometimes we just don't know how to change things because the feelings that we resort to are all that we know. When I was 40 years old, I decided that I had to deal with the anger that I was struggling with, that I had struggled with my whole life. And by the way, people say to me, like, I just don't know. I just don't see you as an angry person. You seem so happy. And most of the time I was. Most of the time I was very happy. I've always been funny. I've loved making people laugh. But yet what would happen is, and this is the thing that I struggled with, is that when I would get angry, I didn't know where the switch was to turn it off. And that was the thing that I didn't know. I didn't know how to get out of that mode once I was in it. Because there are moments when anger is the right emotion. But anger isn't the right emotion for everything. And it was, once again, when I turned 40 that I realized, like, I have to change this because it's going to kill everything. And this is what Paul says in Romans chapter 12. Don't copy the behavior and customs of this world, but let God transform you into a new person by changing the way you think. Then you will learn to know God's will for you, which is good and pleasing and perfect. God really does want to change your life. And if you're open to it and you're willing to take the journey with him, it's not going to be instantaneous. Most of the time it's not. But if you will start changing things, things eventually change. And you'll look back and find the thing that you've been seeking, joy. I gave anger so much of my life, and I didn't even realize I was doing it. And it is a regret that I live with. But I wake up every day, now 11 years later, with joy, with such a deep joy. And the thing that I had been seeking my whole life came when I finally stopped trying to protect myself and hide behind the thing that was destroying me from the inside. Solomon's dad, whose name was King David, wrote these words: "Weeping may last through the night, but joy comes in the morning." That's my hope for you. That's what my hope is for your family. That's what my hope is for the future. That we deal with whatever the root issue is, and we can neutralize it, so that then we start experiencing the thing that we've wanted so deeply, which is joy. Let's pray together. And Lord, we really are grateful for the incredible work that you want to do for us and the work that you want to do in us. Lord, help us to recognize those emotions that aren't healthy, that have been hurting us. Lord, that's our prayer, is that you would help us to identify it, that we'd be open to changing it, and that you would do the work of transforming us. But there's a deep work you want to do, and there's deep work that you want us to do in dealing with these things, so that we can be people of joy who bring joy and experience it wherever we go. Lord, that's our hope, that's our prayer. We pray it in Jesus' name, and everybody said, amen.
Thank you for joining us today. If you made a decision to follow Jesus and begin a relationship with him, congratulations. It's the best decision you're ever going to make. You may be wondering, so what happens now? Where do I go from here? Just text BEGIN to 62488 and we'll be able to send you this free gift. It's a book called Begin, written by Pastor Bob, and it's going to help you take those first steps on your new journey of faith. So remember, to stay up to date with everything happening at Calvary, follow @MyCalvary on Instagram and Facebook. Until next week, we love you. We're praying for you. God bless you.